Jake Morris flew into a rage when he found out what Kevin had done. Now he had to figure out how to get hold of the power pill formula so he wouldn't disappoint his family's elders. Even more importantly, he wanted to get even with Kevin for his betrayal. "What are you guys still doing here? Go to Chicago and find Kevin immediately. I don't care if you bring him back here dead or alive, but no matter what, you have to get the Power Pills formula for me." Jake Morris was panting heavily, and he was so furious. "Yes, sir. Right away." The men nodded respectfully and practically ran out of the room. A few seconds later, another man stumbled into the room. "Sir, your family just sent a message saying that you only have 3 days left to obtain the Power Pill formula." For Jake Morris, this was definitely not good news. He clenched his fist tightly, and the ferocious look on his face made everyone around him feel extremely terrified. Obviously, Jake Morris was flustered and exasperated by the situation. He lowered his head and roared in anger. "Contact the Stratus Group and ask them to send their most elite assassins to Chicago. After you get the Power Pill formula, you must bring Kevin's head back for me." The night passed by quickly. Lily had just woken up and smelled the aroma of breakfast cooking in the kitchen. Looking at Kevin, who was already sitting at the dining table, she couldn't help but smile happily. "Hubby, why did you wake up so early?" Lily asked as she walked downstairs. "I wanted to sleep in a little, but I knew that there was a lazy little piggy who would want to eat some breakfast," Kevin replied with a smile. You're the piggy?" Lily walked over to the dining table, picked up a pastry, and took a bite. "Hubby, I'm going to an interview with an import-export company today." Kevin paused for a moment when he heard her. "You don't have to go to work. I can take care of you from now on." Actually, even Kevin himself didn't know how much the Williams Company was worth, let alone the resources that Tyler, Dawn, and the others had at their disposal. Ever since he started training and working on his herbalism skills, Kevin thought less and less about money. Lily sat down at the table. "I can't just stay at home and not contribute to our household, can I? Besides, you're so busy that I've got nothing to do at home by myself." "Why do you want to go work for another company? Go apply to the Williams Company. Isn't your cousin Nicole also working there? Has she contacted you recently?" Kevin asked her as he took a sip of coffee. It had to be said that Kevin had really misjudged Nicole Jones. Ever since she joined the Williams Company under Miss Wilson's care and Charity Boyer's guidance, she'd learned very quickly. She was about to become the next rising star at Williams Media, and she was being groomed for a very successful career. Kevin passed a plate of scrambled eggs to Lily and offered his help. "Besides, even if you don't want to go to the Williams Company, tell me about the other companies you're interested in. I'll definitely make arrangements for you." Lily's face gradually became serious when she heard what Kevin said. "Hubby, I know you don't lack money right now, but I don't want other people to see me as just another rich woman. No one in Chicago will ever again say that you're only the son-in-law of a good-for-nothing who's living off of his wife's fortune. But I hope that one day I can stand on my own." Lily's tone was very firm. Then she added quite seriously, "Although I don't know anything about what you've been up to lately and I can't help you with it, I want to ease your burden as much as possible. You have to understand that I'm not just arm candy." Kevin was slightly stunned when he heard that. He seemed to have never considered Lily's true feelings. Ever since their relationship had gotten better, he seemed to have really put his care and concern for Lily on the back burner. Fine, you're not arm candy, all right? How long will the interview take? I can give you a ride over there." Kevin hid his thoughts well as he gently stroked her hair. Lily recovered her emotions and said, "It's a medium-sized import and export trading company. I think it's called the Blue Water Export Company." "Okay, let's finish breakfast and head over there," Kevin said gently. Dorothy was still sleeping, so the two of them did their best not to disturb her and wake her up. In his office on the top floor of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Mitchell Cook looked at the constantly flashing messages on his screen and slightly narrowed his eyes. Ever since Drake Cook had been injured, their men had been searching diligently for people who injured Drake. "We found him, boss," one of his assistants suddenly announced. "Through our monitoring of our surveillance cameras, we found that it was at 6:20 p.m. on a road near the suburbs. The people who injured Drake all showed up, and it looks like they were carrying someone." Mitchell Cook nodded his head as he looked at the image displayed on his screen. His eyes were filled with intense anger.
"Send someone up there to investigate immediately. Remember to be careful. Don't alert the enemy."
Mitchell Cook quickly gave the order. Then he called Kevin's number and told him what had happened. Kevin, who was driving at the time, got a somber look on his face after the call ended. He thought to himself, "Jake Morris, what the hell are you up to?" When Kevin was in the hospital a few days before, he heard Mitchell Cook say that Drake had been injured by about 5 people. The first person he thought of who could have arranged that was Jake Morris. The reason was very simple. Jake's people always worked in teams of 5. In addition, the people who came for him were from the Midwest. They also knew that Jake was the only person who wasn't afraid of Kevin seeking revenge after Drake was injured. After dropping Lily off at her interview with the Blue Water Export Company, Kevin wanted to go check out the place where Drake may have been taken. Just as he was about to put the car in gear, he sensed that someone was nearby. He looked up and Harley Shepard was standing there, knocking on the driver's side window. "Oh, Dean Shepard, what are you doing off campus today?" Kevin asked jokingly as he wondered what was going on. "Cut the crap and open the car door. I have something urgent to tell you." Harley Shepard's tone was very serious and it didn't sound as pleasant as it used to. "Did something happen at the school? Whatever it is, I'm sure it doesn't have anything to do with me. I haven't been back in a long time." Kevin replied with a disarming smile. Harley Shepard got in the car and glanced at Kevin as he rolled up the passenger side window. "I'm not in a joking mood. Something serious has happened." "What does that have to do with me?" Kevin asked curiously. He knew very well that Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford were cut from the same cloth. They would never come to see him for no reason. Since they'd sought him out personally, there must be an important problem that they needed his help with. "I'm sure you already know about the Pinnacle. Last night, the dean and I gathered the leaders of many of the schools together, almost 80 of them, big and small, to discuss the imminent war with the Pinnacle," Harley Shepard explained calmly. Kevin immediately sized up the situation. "Is that so? Fighting against the Pinnacle is a huge operation. We have to find some people with real firepower to pull it off. Somebody at my level of training would just be cannon fodder in an all-out war." Harley took a long, hard look at Kevin before getting to the point. "Well, after discussing it for a long time, we realized we have a crucial problem. Whether you're talking about the Healing Arts School or any of the other schools, even the 10 major ones, nobody seems to have qualified herbalists." Harley could see that Kevin had some doubt, so he explained. "Medicinal pills will play a role in the war, so the dean and I came up with a plan. We're going to let you set up an herbalism team to concoct pills for the Healing Arts School and all the other schools and organizations." "What did you just say?" Kevin was dumbfounded. He looked at Shepard in disbelief. "You aren't joking with me, are you?" "Do you think I would joke with you about something as important as this?" Harley suddenly reached out and gave Kevin a little dope slap on the back of his head. "Fighting against the Pinnacle is a top priority. Don't tell me you don't want to help." Kevin's expression turned very serious when he heard that. He drove the car to a quiet street and pulled to the side of the road. "Refining pills for all those schools? What would I get out of that?" Kevin slowly turned his head to look at Harley and asked, "You don't expect me to work for free, do you?" Harley Shepard tracked Kevin down and met with him right after he dropped Lily off for her job interview. Harley got in Kevin's car, and as they drove along, he explained that the Herbal Arts School and all the other schools were in desperate need of talented herbalists for the upcoming war with Pinnacle. He wanted Kevin to put together a team to produce all the pills that would be needed in the fight. But Kevin wanted to know what was in it for him. "What do you say?" Harley Shepard couldn't believe Kevin wasn't willing to do this for free. "What would I get out of it?" Kevin said very frankly. "When someone goes to work with a company, they receive a salary to reward them for their effort. Now, this is far more important than working in some office somewhere. Do you really expect me to make herbal medicine for all those people without any compensation?"
Resisting the pinnacle and fighting for the future of our country isn't enough? Are you really looking to make a little profit from this? Kevin, please don't let me down."
Harley Shepard sounded distressed, but Kevin wasn't swayed by Shepard's argument. He smiled a little and waved his hand dismissively. "Dean Shepard, please don't use moral arguments to try to manipulate me. I've never been fooled by that." Then the smile left Kevin's face as he added, "You said you want to fight for the future of humanity. When I was suffering because I was being treated unfairly, what did anybody do for me? Why didn't somebody stand up for me then?" Then Kevin looked Shepard right in the eye and declared emphatically, "Although I belong to one of the 10 major schools and I have the responsibility to resist the pinnacle, I won't deny this fact. But at least I should be on equal footing with those people, shouldn't I? Do they expect to benefit from my services just because they think they're so important?" Harley Shepard didn't interrupt Kevin when he saw how much the young man had to say. Before going to speak with Kevin, Shepard had sent some people to investigate everything about him, including the fact that he'd been kicked out of the Williams family. Harley Shepard had to admit that what Kevin had endured with his family, and with the Jones family for all those years, had certainly been heartbreaking. He wished that he'd had the money or the power to help him, but that wasn't possible because of his low status in the outside world. Kevin explained what he wanted as clearly as he could. "So, Dean Shepard, you asked me to make some pills. Why don't you just admit that this is a business deal? And since this is only a business transaction, I'm asking you, what's in it for me?"
"What is it that you want?"
Shepard didn't really know what Kevin wanted out of this arrangement. With the Night King as Kevin's mentor, it was difficult for Harley Shepard to think of anything that he could offer that might tempt him to help. Kevin thought for a while and slowly replied, "I don't want anything." These few words stunned Harley Shepard. What can you offer to someone who has no desires? "I'll resist the pinnacle and use my own connections to contact more people to help produce herbal meds and protect the world from this threat." After saying this, Kevin suddenly put his foot down on the accelerator. He quickly cranked the steering wheel and the car shot forward like a rocket. In the corridor on the 4th floor of the Blue Water Export Company, Lily was waiting patiently in a chair. She was nervously holding onto her resume, wondering if she really was qualified for the position. There weren't many people who came for the interview. Coincidentally, Emma Larson was also there. She'd arrived ahead of Lily and already had been interviewing for more than 20 minutes. When Emma came out of the interview room in high spirits, she made sure to give Lily a snotty look. Then she walked up to her and tried to get under her skin so she'd fail the interview. "Lily, your husband is already so rich. How could he be okay with letting you look for a job? Is it because he's unable to satisfy you in other ways?" "What the hell are you talking about?" Lily frowned slightly. "Aren't you here trying to find a job too? Why? Did your husband finally dump you?" You could see the displeasure on Emma's face like she was a cat and someone had stepped on her tail. After Kevin left Dominic Archer's car dealership after the incident with the salesman, Emma's husband Timothy had been fired by the Williams Company. He blamed all of his problems on her and never wanted to see her again. Timothy took back all the houses and cars that he'd given her and kicked her out into the street. So Emma was forced to go out and look for a job. Emma responded curtly, I advise you to give up on this job. You aren't qualified to work at this company." Then she turned around abruptly and headed for the exit. A few minutes later, Emma had just walked out of the company's front door when she bumped into Kevin, the man responsible for destroying her husband's wealth. "I didn't expect to meet you here, Mr. Williams. Maybe it was fate." She didn't feel any hatred toward Kevin, but instead made an effort to be polite to him. Her body was almost touching Kevin's as she spoke. Kevin reflexively took a couple of steps back and pulled away from her. "You came here for an interview too? Did you see Lily?" "Don't worry, President Williams. Lily hasn't started her interview yet." Emma gave him a charming smile and deliberately leaned forward, trying to show off her cleavage. "It's still early. Should we find a place to talk in depth?" Emma's voice became softer. "Believe me, Mr. Williams, you didn't see me on a good day at Dominic Archer's car showroom. I could make you very happy." Emma Larson thought that if she could get close to Kevin, it would be millions of times better than staying with Timothy. Unfortunately, she'd seriously miscalculated. "I think I should go up and check on Lily." Not only did Kevin not have any interest in someone like Emma, but her behavior also filled him with disgust. Upstairs in the interview room, a gross man with mustard stains on his tie and an unshaven face, but not in a stylish GQ way, was looking at Lily with lust in his eyes. He was Sid Bramler, the manager of the Human Resources Department of the Blue Water Export Company. He was in charge of recruiting new employees, but he also used his position now and then to try to get fringe benefits. "Your resume is quite outstanding, but I need to have more to go on than just that if I'm going to hire you." Bramler was staring at Lily's chest the whole time he was talking. "Mr. Bramler, I've been involved in the import-export business before, and I have no problem starting from the bottom and working my way up. Please give me a chance, and you won't be disappointed." Lily managed to make a very good statement, even though Bramler's wandering eyes made her sick to her stomach. But she chose not to tell him off because she really needed a job. "You should keep in mind that although our company isn't as well known as the KWTD Corporation, it's not a small company either. It's not that easy to join our team." Then Bramler added, "Not everyone gets the chance to work here without going through me. Do you understand what I mean?" Lily wasn't naive, and she immediately understood what Sid Bramler was talking about. She got a very angry look on her face. "Director Bramler, I'm here for a job interview, and you're in a position of authority. Please be careful what you say." Okay. I'll watch what I say. In any case, your qualifications meet our company's needs, so you can be assured that you'll be hired. As for the scope of your work, someone will get in touch with you very soon." Bramler spoke slowly as he thought about how he could benefit from hiring Lily. In his opinion, she definitely had a quick temper, but he figured that once she'd been working there for a while, she would eventually give in to his advances and throw herself at him. "Really, Director Bramler?" Lily widened her eyes and then asked excitedly, "Have I really been hired?" "Yes, but you may find working here a little difficult." Sid Bramler licked his lips and then continued. "Before you came in, there was a young woman who interviewed with me, and she seemed to have a better idea of how things work in an office like ours. You could really learn a lot from her." Lily's excited mood instantly vanished when she heard this. "Well, now that I've passed the interview, I think I'll get going." Lily really didn't want to stay there any longer, and she headed out the door in a hurry. Sid Bramler had an evil smirk on his face as he laughed to himself. "Lily, I'm not afraid of the tough act you put on. Before long, you'll learn just how powerful I am." After she left, the next job applicant walked in, but nobody noticed that someone else had appeared near the entrance to the interview room. It was Kevin, who'd been eavesdropping the whole time. Lily passed her interview at the Blue Water Export Company, but the hiring manager, Sid Bramler, was a lech who really gave her the creeps. She hurried out of there as soon as she could, leaving the man alone in the office, fantasizing about how he could seduce his newest employee. Bramler was lost in thought, so much so that he didn't even notice the next interviewee coming into the room. Suddenly, with a bang, Kevin kicked open the door of the interview room. It slammed into the wall with a loud bang and flew off its hinges. "Who the hell are you?" The loud noise snapped Bramler back to reality. He angrily banged his fist on the table, stood up, and pointed directly at Kevin. Unfortunately, Kevin didn't give him enough time to talk. He walked over and slapped Bramler right in the face. Kevin's strength had increased more than ever. Although he deliberately held back, his slap had more energy than an ordinary person could withstand. Sid Bramler, who wasn't very tall but was built like a fire hydrant, spun around a few times from the blow. The spinning made him so dizzy that he had to sit down on the ground to regain his balance. That's when he noticed that a couple of his teeth had fallen out, and there was blood flowing down from the corner of his mouth. The job applicant who was waiting to be interviewed by Bramler was shocked by Kevin's awesome entrance.
Where did this freaking hothead come from? He actually dared to slap the company's hiring manager.
The applicant muttered to himself. He didn't want to get involved in this violent situation, so he kept his mouth shut and carefully slipped out of the room. Kevin didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, he grabbed Sid Bramler's hair and lifted him up from the floor. He didn't mess around with niceties and got straight to the point. I don't have time to talk to a nobody like you. Call your company's president over here immediately. Otherwise, I'll keep slapping you until he finally shows up. Then he threw Bramler back on the floor and walked over to a chair, where he sat down and put his feet up on the table. All of this happened suddenly, and Sid Bramler was scared to death. Without thinking twice about it, he took out his phone and called the company's president. After explaining the situation, Bramler curled up on the floor in a fetal position, not daring to even look at Kevin. In less than 10 minutes, the president of the Blue Water Export Company rushed into the room.
What the hell is going on? Bramler, how did you get beaten like this?
Ralph Hartman asked in shock. Bramler shook his head a few times and pointed his trembling finger at Kevin. Ralph Hartman's face became very somber as he asked,
Sir, who are you?
You're the president of this company? Kevin slightly raised his eyelids as he looked up at the man. Let's sit down and have a nice chat. I'd like to buy your company. Just name your price. This unexpected request stunned Ralph Hartman. Although the Blue Water Export Company wasn't very large, its future prospects were quite impressive. To be honest, he really didn't have any intentions of selling it. When he came back to his senses, Hartman couldn't keep from chuckling.
Sir, I have no idea who you are, but do you know what kind of question you're asking me? My company is worth at least $3 billion. Can you afford to buy it?
Ralph Hartman kept looking at Kevin, trying to figure him out. Although Kevin was dressed in ordinary clothes, Hartman wasn't showing any contempt for him. A lot of wealthy people were in the habit of dressing down to avoid attracting attention. He didn't want to take a chance on accidentally offending someone like that. I don't care how much your company is worth. I just want to ask whether you want to sell it or not. I'm not interested in hearing about anything else. Kevin took out his phone and started a video call. Then he tossed his phone on the table. Moments later, several of Chicago's most powerful business leaders felt their phones vibrate. There was nobody in the entire city who hadn't heard of them. Rachel, the vice president of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Mitchell Cook from the Whistler Hotel, Adriana Wright, the president of the West Chicago International Group, and Emo Squire, who owned a successful bodyguard service. And Miss Wilson and Gilbert Rhodes were on the video call too. Every single one of them had a solid reputation all across the Chicago region.
Director Cook, President Wright.
Ralph Hartman put his phone on the table without knowing what to do. He was in complete panic mode.
Mr. Hartman, I didn't know you were so daring. What have you done to displease Mr. Williams?
Emo Squire was sitting in an enormous leather chair in his luxurious office. He seemed to be reviewing some documents. Mitchell Cook rubbed his chin and remarked,
I think you're looking for some excitement because all your success is getting too boring for you.
Mr. Williams told us why he called us. President Hartman, can you give us a price? I'll immediately send someone to your office to sign the contract, Rachel explained very firmly. As Miss Wilson was signing one of the many documents on her desk, she said, The Williams Company will give you full market value based on a fair evaluation of your assets. I'm sure that you'll find our offer quite reasonable." Ralph Hartman took a deep breath. He was well off, but he was nothing compared to these people. He was feeling an unimaginable amount of pressure. "I'd like to ask you to wait for a moment. I want to know why you're suddenly interested in buying my company. Is it because you're impressed with our future prospects?" Ralph Hartman wiped the cold sweat from his forehead as he got up the courage to ask them why they were so eager to buy him out. Gilbert Rhodes put down his coffee cup and looked straight into the camera as he remarked,
"That has nothing to do with it. Your company isn't all that profitable as far as I can tell."
Emo Squire sat back and took a sip of his smoothie as he clarified the situation. "It's only because Mr. Williams is interested in buying your company that we're willing to make an offer. We're only doing this for Mr. Williams, not ourselves. If you've got any brains at all, don't do anything to blow this deal, okay?" Hearing what all these powerful people had to say, Ralph Hartman's knees began to get weak. He really didn't understand what kind of influence this young man in front of him had. The most powerful and successful people in Chicago wanted to buy his export company just because Kevin had asked them to? Mitchell Cook seemed to think that saying one more word to Ralph Hartman would be a waste of time.
"Okay, I don't have anything else to tell you. Someone will arrive at your company headquarters in a few minutes to talk about the specifics. As for the shares, transfer 90% of them directly to Mr. Williams."
"That's all I need to hear. I have to get to an important meeting, so I need to hang up." Miss Wilson left the video call abruptly. When the call ended, Ralph Hartman looked at Kevin again. He had nothing but flattering words for him now. "Hello, Mr. Williams. My name is Ralph Hartman. I don't know if you need anything else, but I can help you at any time." But Kevin interrupted him with a wave of his hand. "All I need right now is for you to leave the room." The smile on Ralph Hartman's face froze, but he still managed to nod sadly. He knew that Kevin was somebody he could never afford to offend. Mitchell Cook and the others were the foremost leaders in all of Chicago, and they had to be respectful to this young man. He had no choice but to do as Kevin wished. After Hartman left, only Kevin and Sid Bramler were left in the room. "Sit down. I want to talk with you." Kevin didn't even look at him. But Bramler, who was covering half of his face, didn't dare to sit down. In the span of 10 minutes, this young man had gone from an unknown intruder to his boss. Kevin rapped his knuckles on the table and asked him bluntly, "Do you know why I slapped you?" Bramler slowly shook his head. "Lily is my wife," Kevin replied simply. Bramler was shocked at first, but then he was overwhelmed. He finally understood who he was dealing with. He was Kevin Williams, the CEO of the Williams Company, and he definitely heard of him. Rumor had it that Kevin was the devil incarnate. The destruction of several powerful Chicago families had been linked to him. He'd even taken over Vito Booker's Booker Phoenix Corporation. In a flash, Sid Bramler was on his knees in front of Kevin. He begged him for forgiveness. "President Williams, I was just blinded by greed and lust. Please forgive me. I promise to change my ways." Kevin had just arranged with Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, and the others to buy the Blue Water Export Company. When Sid Bramler realized who Kevin was, and that he'd made the mistake of trying to seduce his wife Lily in exchange for company favors, he started begging him for forgiveness. "To tell you the truth, I didn't mean to injure you that much, but I was pretty pissed off. But you have to remember one thing. Don't ever let me hear my Lily complain about being bullied in your company. Otherwise..." Kevin didn't finish his sentence. He put his hand on the table and tapped it lightly. As Bramler watched in astonishment, the entire table broke into 1,000 pieces. "Do you know what I'm saying?" Kevin asked menacingly. "I understand. When she comes in to work at the company tomorrow, I'll arrange a better position for her immediately. If there's any problem at all, I'll help solve it." Bramler stammered as he practically choked on his words. "Absolutely not." Kevin waved his hand to stop him. Bramler was confused again. He didn't understand what Kevin was trying to do. After all, Kevin had just bought the entire company. He wouldn't even mind putting Lily in charge of the whole operation. How could Kevin not want him to promote her? What I mean is that you can't promote her openly. You need to change the company regulations to keep all this confidential. Do you see what I mean? Kevin replied with some apprehension. I understand, President Williams. Don't worry. Leave it to me. Bramler nodded anxiously several times to show that he understood. Kevin felt a little relieved. Soon, Mitchell Cook's men arrived at the Blue Water Export Company and signed a series of contracts to transfer ownership. After dealing with the transaction, Kevin went to visit Drake Cook in his hospital room. He had a plan in his mind that hadn't been fully realized. Since the major schools were about to send people over to him, there was a big storm on the horizon for the city of Chicago. So if Kevin wanted to carry out his overall plan, just a few measly resources and several small companies were far from enough to do the job. He was aware that he couldn't pull it off alone.
Kevin, how are you, sir?
Drake Cook, who was lying on the hospital bed, immediately tried to get up when he saw who was visiting him. No need for formalities. Stay where you are. Your body hasn't fully recovered from your injuries yet. Kevin casually pulled a chair over and sat down next to him. Drake, do you have anything on your mind after this recent attack? Drake was obviously stunned when he heard Kevin's question. He didn't know how to express the emotions he was feeling deep inside. You don't need to be too cautious, just say what you're thinking, Kevin reassured him with a smile. Drake Cook clenched his fists and replied, Well, Kevin, actually, I do have an idea. It's mainly because I'm still not strong enough. I haven't established my reputation yet, even though I've always tried to make others fear me. I think that's why those people decided to attack me. He would never forget the night he was attacked. He had a despondent look on his face as he described the scene. A few of his trusted assistants had been killed right in front of his eyes just like that. However, he couldn't do anything about it. He could only watch helplessly as his trusted aides were crushed. Drake still couldn't forget the powerlessness he felt at that moment. Kevin nodded in understanding and asked him, Do you want to become stronger? Drake looked up at Kevin and answered without hesitation, Yes, I do. Kevin patted his shoulder and said, A strong attitude is more important than anything else, Drake. Just make the best use of your time to recover and take control of things in Chicago. When the time comes, I'll give you a chance to really grow. In the dean's office at the Healing Arts School, Harley Shepard told Wayne Ford everything that he'd said to Kevin about helping set up a team to make herbal meds for all the schools that were going to be fighting against the Pinnacle. Do you think that Kevin will agree to help us? Shepard asked. He wasn't feeling confident about this idea at all.
Why would he agree?
Wayne Ford retorted sharply.
I think Kevin was right. You were wrong to even ask him in the first place.
I was wrong? How could I be wrong? Shepard was confused by Wayne's comment. He was ready to dye the battlefield red with blood in order to resist the Pinnacle, and he thought that any person with a shred of decency should be willing to make herbal pills without any compensation at all. Wayne Ford looked him in the eyes and sighed.
Have you noticed that in recent years the major schools have started to change?
Shepard was stunned by his colleague's question. He slowly put down his coffee mug and began to seriously think about the implication of Wayne Ford's question.
Don't you think the school's actions are no longer virtuous?
Wayne Ford asked him probingly. Then he sighed again and continued to share his opinion.
They use their school's name just to scheme against each other and try to get more and more resources and power. Think about it. If the 10 major schools are really united, why didn't anyone stand up and protest when I threatened the union?
Wayne Ford walked over to the window and looked thoughtfully into the distance.
Paul Vaughn and the others captured Kevin's mother-in-law and tried to force him to hand over the power pill formula. They were only listening to the Williams family side of the story because they didn't bother to look into the matter any further. They kept looking for a fight with Kevin, and they resorted to despicable actions to get their way. Wouldn't you call that bullying the weak?
Harley Shepard listened to him intently, and he seemed more and more somber as Wayne continued to talk. With an embarrassed look on his face, he asked,
Everything that you just said is right, but fighting against the Pinnacle is our top priority right now. In my opinion, Kevin is ignoring our true problem. Are you trying to tell me that he isn't wrong at all?
Even if he's made countless mistakes in the past, it's because of the power struggle between the so-called righteous schools. It's really because of them that Kevin has become like this.
Wayne Ford let out a long sigh. In the meeting room of the Central Alternative Healing Academy in Chicago, Paul Vaughn was sitting in a large velvet chair with a dejected look on his face. Jeffrey Bowie and the others didn't seem too happy either. Although Central Alternative Healing Academy had won the battle this time, they'd also paid a terrible price. Everyone started discussing how to deal with the Pinnacle's attack. They thought that the Healing Arts School's plan was unrealistic and they wanted to use all their resources to fight the Pinnacle. They knew that Wayne Ford had good intentions, but the problem was there simply weren't enough people available to fight against the Pinnacle. What they needed was more power pills so they could train a lot of fighters in a short period of time. Paul Vaughn took a deep breath and finally spoke to them.
I think we need to focus on Kevin again. As long as I can get the power pill formula, all our problems will be solved.
The room fell silent and everyone looked at him.
Why are you all looking at me?
Paul Vaughn asked in surprise.
In order to train someone quickly enough to face the Pinnacle, the only solution is the power pill. And right now, the only herbalist we know is Kevin Williams.
No one could argue at that point. You could hear a pin drop in the room. But at the same time, no one stepped forward to agree with him either. They all remembered how impressive the Radiants had been when they showed up to rescue Dorothy. They'd seen their power with their own eyes. Jeffrey Bowie suddenly stood up and announced loudly,
I agree with Paul. That old bastard Wayne Ford simply doesn't care about us. If we don't find a way out of this, we're finished. But what about the Radiants? Isn't Kevin a member of the Radiants?
One of the people from a minor school asked worriedly. Then another school's representative commented,
Even though Kenneth Wilkinson hasn't made any moves recently, the Radiants has been busy recruiting people. Lots of them.
Wayne Ford scanned the crowd and said,
The Radiants won't actually be that difficult to deal with. I don't think Kenneth Wilkinson would risk offending so many of us just because of Kevin. Don't you agree?
They all still couldn't agree on what to do next. Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the top schools were feeling dejected after suffering heavy losses despite winning the battle against the Alliance's army. Now that they had to deal with the Pinnacle's attempts to invade the continent, they knew that they needed Kevin's power pill formula in order to train as many experts as they could in a short amount of time. However, they couldn't come to an agreement because some were too afraid of facing the Radiants. Then Wayne Ford spoke up, suggesting that Kenneth Wilkinson wouldn't attack them again just because of Kevin. They were all surprised to hear this, but what Wayne Ford said made sense. While Kevin was supposedly one of the Radiance's higher-ranking members, why would Kenneth Wilkinson risk offending everyone just for him? Within the Great Powers, how many schools were there? Collectively, they believed that they vastly outnumbered the Radiants.
I have another question. How are we going to make Kevin give us the pill formula willingly?
Someone suddenly asked. Wayne Ford, Paul Vaughn, and the others couldn't help but frown when they heard this. After all, this was the most important and practical question for them to consider. And many people started whispering to each other again.
Kevin's mother-in-law is obviously not an option anymore.
One of the usually quiet leaders shook his head.
My God, don't even mention that woman. Despite being held captive for so long, Kevin didn't even bother to save her himself. He only sent the members of the Radiants to do it for him.
Another one added.
If he didn't dare to show his face to his own mother-in-law, why don't we look for his wife or his parents? He can't be that ruthless, can he?
A third one suggested. Paul Vaughn and the others looked at each other as they thought about this option. It wasn't only a matter of who they should target to draw Kevin out, but more importantly,
which of them would be willing to do it? The top schools and their leaders had been famous among the great powers for many years. If they failed again because of Kevin's preparedness, and if the word were to spread about their actions, their reputation would certainly be ruined. Meanwhile, Kevin had just walked out of the hospital after visiting Drake Cook and was about to leave when he suddenly stopped in his tracks. A strong sense of danger made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. What could it be now? Kevin was puzzled by the sensation. At the same time, he kept looking around cautiously. Suddenly, his phone rang. The caller ID indicated that it was Scott Whitney. "What's the matter, Mr. Whitney?" Kevin asked with a solemn expression.
Listen up. The Reaper Squad has received some news about the people from the Morris family. It seems that they've decided to hire the services of the Stratus Group. In turn, their leader sent a lot of elite assassins to infiltrate Chicago. Their goal is obviously to kill you," Scott Whitney reported, sounding dead serious.
Do they really think so highly of me? Kevin couldn't help but be stunned. The Morris family and the Stratus Group were now working together. That was an interesting plot twist.
Don't underestimate them, Kevin. Even though Jake Morris may just seem like a spoiled rich kid with a bad temper, the family behind him is truly powerful.
Scott Whitney couldn't help but warn him. I think it's a little too late for that. Looks like they've already found me. A strange smile appeared at the corner of Kevin's mouth. He raised his right hand and slowly waved it in the air. At the same time, at the entrance of a shopping mall 100 yards away, 5 men suddenly shuddered. They were the Tanner brothers, Jake Morris's loyal subordinates. From the eldest to the youngest brother, the 5 of them worked together as a team. Why do I feel like that kid saw us spying on him? Yale Tanner, the youngest brother, gulped in amazement.
Does he have heightened senses or something? And so what if he does? It would be impossible for him to attack us from that far away, no matter how fast he is. It's impossible to jump more than 100 yards, isn't it?
While Sage Tanner, the second brother, didn't usually have much confidence in himself, he relied on the fact that all his brothers were there with him at the moment, so he arrogantly vented his anger. While the 2 of them were talking, Tyson Tanner, the third brother, suddenly called out, "Hey, kid!" Then he turned to his siblings and said, "See? He can't see or hear us."
What's wrong with you, Tyson?
Felix Tanner, the fourth brother, turned around in shock and scolded him in a low voice. "What? I'm just proving a point to you guys." Tyson Tanner smirked as he turned his attention back to the entrance of the hospital. Suddenly, Tyson's voice was filled with fear. "Wait, that kid is gone."
How could he have disappeared? Where did he go?
The eldest brother, Elijah Tanner, who'd been standing in the middle and was ready to make a move at any moment, couldn't help but change his expression when he heard his brother's warning. When the 4 brothers followed Tyson's gaze and looked over, they couldn't help but scratch their heads. Kevin, who was standing at the entrance of the hospital just a few seconds before, had really disappeared. Elijah was the first one to recover his senses. He called out to his brothers to leave immediately.
"This isn't good. Everyone retreat."
The other 4 men gradually got a hold of themselves too and followed their eldest brother inside the mall. In just a few moments, they quickly disappeared into the crowd. Half an hour later, at the foot of a large hill to the north of Chicago, Elijah Tanner and the others stopped and gasped for breath. At the same time, the 5 of them kept looking around to check if they'd been followed. "Elijah, do you really think that kid really saw us earlier?" Yale Tanner asked as he gasped for breath.
Yale, why are you so afraid? Even if he did, we've already run pretty far away from both the hospital and the mall. Given the distance and our speed, it would be impossible for him to find us, Sage said in a somewhat restless tone, as if he were trying to reassure himself.
"I definitely wouldn't worry about it too much."
Elijah's entire face looked extremely serious. Elijah's power base was the highest among the 5 of them, and he was just a half step away from becoming a level 5 expert. However, half an hour earlier, when he discovered that Kevin had disappeared, he could clearly feel an invisible pressure rapidly approaching them from afar. This was why he quickly urged his brothers to retreat. Tyson, who was leaning against a big tree, remarked,
This is a pretty safe place. I can't think of any problems that we might encounter now that we're here. Still, that kid is certainly quite bold for daring to fight our boss head-on. Why don't we go back to our station and report to Mr. Morris about the situation? As for our next step, we'll have to discuss it afterwards," Tyson added in a loud voice.
The rest of them nodded their heads slightly, but just as they were about to leave, the 5 Tanner brothers suddenly stopped in their tracks. A chill that made their hearts grow cold that unknowingly filled their surroundings. "Where are you going? Did I say that I'd let you leave?" The sharp voice seemed to come from the depths of hell. Not only was it cold and emotionless, but it also shook the souls of these 5 men. A few seconds later, they heard the voice again. "Since I've come all the way here to visit with you men, I think it would be better for you to stay and entertain your guests for a little while." Elijah, Tanner, and the others quickly reacted as the 5 of them gathered together and kept scanning their surroundings, looking back and forth for a sign of who was speaking to them. Elijah's body tensed up as he asked loudly in all directions,
"I wonder who came here to joke around with us."
"Why would I be joking around with you guys? Didn't you come to Chicago to find me?" Kevin's voice replied. Suddenly, the trunk of a tall tree moved. A second later, it came crashing towards Elijah and his brothers. Fortunately, they caught sight of this just in time and managed to strike back, splintering the enormous tree trunk. This caused wood splinters to fly in all directions, stirring up a large cloud of dust as the rest of the tree fell to the ground with a loud crash. "You're pretty strong. It's such a shame that you've chosen to follow such an awful leader." Kevin's voice suddenly came from behind them. The 5 Tanner brothers turned around and were shocked to see Kevin standing right in front of them. When they got a good look at him, they began to break into a cold sweat. "Tell me who you are. Did that spoiled brat Jake Morris send you here? Or were you sent by those reckless people from the Stratus Group?" Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest. He kept staring at them as he asked for an explanation. Elijah and the others were speechless. They'd never heard anyone say something like that about Jake Morris. After all, the Morris family was like a huge mountain that towered above everyone else. And anyone who dared to disrespect any of their family members would surely be crushed to death. Judging by the looks on your faces, I've already guessed which one it is. Jake Morris is really a stupid boss. How dare he send only a few poor guys like you to cause trouble for me?" Kevin said teasingly with a slight frown.
"How dare you insult the people of the Morris family?"
Tyson Tanner couldn't hold it in any longer.
"Kid, let me give you a piece of advice. Just give us the pill formula while you can and nothing bad will happen to you. Otherwise, don't blame us for what happens to you."
"And if I don't hand it over, what can you possibly do to me?" Kevin didn't care about Tyson's threat at all. "I can see that you're already close to becoming level 5 experts. In that case, then why are you guys so willing to work for a jackass like Jake Morris?" Just as the Tanner brothers had reached the foot of a hill to the north of Chicago and thought that they'd escaped from Kevin, a voice suddenly called out to them as a huge tree trunk crashed down. After thwarting this surprise attack, they found themselves face to face with Kevin. He could tell that they were Jake Morris's henchmen. And when Tyson Tanner threatened to harm Kevin if he didn't hand over the power pill formula, he asked them why they were willing to work for such a terrible boss when they were already close to becoming level 5 experts. Kevin took a few steps forward and said, "Men like you should choose a better leader to follow. Jake Morris is like the captain of a sinking ship who's willing to drown all of his crew just to survive. Why don't you want to find someone who actually values your talent and will treat you with respect?" To be honest, he really wanted to recruit them for the Radiants. His organization's combat strength would increase a lot if these 5 brothers joined him. "Are you saying all of this because you're trying to recruit us? We're not stupid enough to fall for your tricks. Who do you think you are?" Felix Tanner snorted at him.
"Let's finish him off and take the pill formula. That way we can go back and report to our boss as soon as possible."
Elijah swiftly took out a dagger from his waist. Yale Tanner, who couldn't wait any longer, instantly rushed towards Kevin. However, a terrifying pressure suddenly burst outward from Kevin's body, slowing his attack. A second later, Kevin moved with lightning speed, punching Yale right in the chest. Caught off guard, Yale spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face instantly turned pale. But before he could get up, Kevin stepped right on his chest with powerful force, pinning him to the ground. The sight of this scared the remaining four brothers. After all, they knew just how strong Yale was. Among the five of them, the one with the highest power base was none other than Elijah Tanner. However, because they trained in different combat techniques, each brother had a certain specialty. And in terms of explosive strength, Yale was definitely the strongest of the bunch. So how had he been so easily thrown to the ground by Kevin with just a single punch? Yale Tanner stared at Kevin with his eyes wide open. His heart was filled with shock. Are you surprised? Kevin shrugged his shoulders slightly. Then he pulled Yale up and punched him in the chest one more time, sending him flying and crashing into two thick trees. Yale Tanner instantly passed out from the impact and dropped to the ground. This instantly ignited the anger in the hearts of Elijah Tanner and his brothers. It seemed that Kevin was provoking and insulting them on purpose. If I didn't have the strength and ability, why would I dare to fight the Morris family head-on? Kevin remarked in a flat tone as if he'd done nothing out of the ordinary.
How dare you hurt my brother? You're going to pay with your life.
Elijah Tanner's expression turned extremely nasty, and the energy inside his body instantly burst out. I see you're already close to breaking through as a level 5 expert. Let's see if you can withstand what I'm about to do. The corners of Kevin's mouth curled into a smile. A moment later, both Elijah and Kevin threw punches at each other at the same time. The tremendous force caused waves of energy to ripple across their surroundings. Both of them then retracted their right hands and quickly kicked out their right legs as if they were completely in sync. This collision produced a deafening sound, which was loud enough to make an ordinary person's eardrums explode.
Should we go and help Elijah?
Sage asked his two other brothers as he stared in disbelief at Kevin and Elijah. Felix shook his head and rejected his idea.
Save your strength. If we go up there and try to help, won't we just distract him? I mean, look at the two of them.
Meanwhile, Tyson simply stood there without saying a word. His eyes were fixed on Kevin and Elijah. From time to time, he got a thoughtful look on his face. With the two individuals matching each other's movements one after another, this kind of battle was rare and valuable to them. If they could learn something from it, it would bring unimaginable benefits to their future training. As time passed, the two of them shifted from fighting on the ground to the trees, as they slowly made their way up the trail. Countless trees and stones were cracked and broken wherever they passed by. The more Elijah fought, the more shocked he became. Although Kevin's strikes weren't very powerful for him, he felt like their battle would never end. And up until now, he hadn't even touched Kevin's body, not even the edges of his clothes. Suddenly, Kevin seized an opportunity and managed to kick Elijah right in the chest. This instantly turned the momentum of their battle in his favor, and as Elijah violently crashed into a rock, he coughed up another mouthful of blood.
Elijah, are you okay?
Sage Tanner was the first to run over to check on him.
You weren't injured, were you? Don't scare us like that.
Tyson worriedly checked Elijah to see if he was injured. Felix Tanner, who'd been carrying Yale on his back, didn't say anything. He just looked at Kevin as if he was ready to risk his life against him at any moment. Kevin wiped the dust from his shoulder and said casually, "Don't worry, guys, he won't die from what I did to him. I just wanted to teach him a lesson, but I don't have any intention of gravely injuring your brother." When they heard this, the four brothers became very worried. Deep down, they really wanted to ask Kevin,
"Are you joking with us? My brothers haven't even woken up yet."
"You guys should know very well that if I really wanted to kill any of you, you'd already be dead. So I'm giving you one last chance. Think about what I said before," Kevin said roughly in a booming voice. Sage, Tyson, and Felix Tanner all looked at each other. Clearly, they were feeling conflicted. How did Jake Morris treat them? The Tanner brothers knew in their hearts that, aside from their fancy clothes and their reputation as the Morris family's trusted warriors, even a pet dog was treated more humanely than they were. It wasn't that they hadn't thought about following another leader, but it was just that they hadn't found a better opportunity. But now that they heard what Kevin said, the seeds of resentment buried deep in their hearts had already started to take root and germinate. Back in Chicago, Dominic Archer had just finished a training session in the Archer family's mansion. He was lying on the sofa and listening to his assistant give his report. "Boss, we just received news that Drake Cook has called a lot of his men to the hospital. It seems like they're discussing something important." Dominic Archer's aide informed him respectfully. "Haha, what trick is Drake Cook trying to pull? The only reason he's still alive today is he has a powerful father," Dominic sneered. "You're right, boss. Right now, the Steele family barely has any influence in Chicago, and it looks like pretty soon they'll lose the rest. On top of that, Drake Cook was just attacked and hospitalized. You're potentially the last man standing, which gives you an opening to set yourself up as the sole kingpin in the city." Dominic's assistant added, "Boss, I suggest we use a forceful approach tonight. We should grab all the remaining properties the Steele family has left so we can further increase our strength. Plus, we can't wait until Drake Cook is fully recovered. Otherwise, it will take even longer for us to crush him." "If we succeed, then Chicago will become yours." A few of Dominic Archer's other trusted subordinates proudly encouraged him. However, Dominic Archer wasn't celebrating. In fact, he didn't even say a word about the plan. Dominic put down the report in his hand and asked, "Has there been any activity from the Williams Company recently?" "Why are you asking about the Williams Company?" His assistant wondered out loud. The Archer family and the Williams Company are obviously on different paths, and although the Williams Company is strong, they've never interfered in our matters. Are they planning on causing trouble for us all of a sudden? He didn't expect Dominic Archer to ask such a question. He and the others were in a daze for a moment, unsure how to reply. "As long as there's nothing happening on their end, that's a good thing," Dominic remarked faintly. He had no intention of explaining this to any of them. However, his question only made his people even more confused. "You guys go and make the arrangements. Tomorrow night I'm inviting the president of the Williams Company for dinner at the hotel. When the time comes, I don't want anything to go wrong," Dominic said with a mysterious smile on his face. At the Salix Leaf complex, Dorothy was furious when she heard that her daughter had gone out for a job interview. "Why do you think I'm upset with you? Didn't you hear a word of what I said earlier? That piece of trash Kevin obviously has a big company already in his hands, and yet you still insist on choosing some lousy company to work for? Tell me what you're thinking. I'm really curious about what you have to say for yourself." Dorothy was so angry that her lips started to quiver. "Mom, the Williams Company still belongs to Kevin. I've already told you that I'll never work there. I don't want him to have any ideas about me stealing the company away from him in the future," Lily explained very seriously. "Does Kevin even know about your interview?" Dorothy suddenly asked. "Yes. In fact, he was actually the one who drove me there this morning." Although Lily's eyes looked a little dull, she was very happy. After all, she finally had a job that she applied for on her own. And although there was still a big gap between her and Kevin, she was willing to work hard in order to make him proud of her. "I think you must be crazy to be passing up such a golden opportunity. You're driving me nuts, Lily." Dorothy pointed at her. Her hand was trembling. "I won't stand for this nonsense. Call Kevin right now. I must make him hand over the Williams Company to you today. Otherwise, no matter what either of you says, you must get a divorce." Lily instantly became incensed. She stood up and replied loudly, "Mom, I already said that I won't take the Williams Company. How many times do I have to repeat myself?" "Why don't you want the Williams Company? With such wealth, you wouldn't even need to work hard to live comfortably. When Kevin drove you to your interview, didn't he say anything about it?" Dorothy asked loudly. "With his current status as the president of the Williams Company, did you even need an interview? Why isn't he helping you? Doesn't he want you to succeed? What a useless husband." Lily suddenly felt dejected when she heard this. Actually, Kevin really hadn't helped her much. From the end of her interview until now, Kevin hadn't even called her to ask how things went. Compared to her, Kevin had done a lot of things for Phoebe Anderson. Not only did he appraise antiques for her family business time and time again, But he even went all the way to Detroit just to snatch her back from the Hayes family. Everyone in Chicago knew about that. It was rumored that the CEO of the Williams Company had a relationship with the Anderson family's only daughter. Meanwhile, his wife from the Jones family was in danger of being divorced and kicked out at any time. Did you hear me when I asked you to call your good-for-nothing husband? It doesn't matter if you don't want to talk to him, but at least let me help you avoid a decision that you'll regret, Dorothy said indignantly. I didn't know that this problem was up to me to solve. Why did I give birth to such a silly daughter? After waking up and recovering from his injuries, Elijah Tanner was looking at Kevin, who was sitting on a rock in front of him. He couldn't relax for a long time, but he knew that there were some things that he really couldn't say out loud or else things would quickly get out of hand. Meanwhile, Sage Tanner and his other brothers were sitting quietly with their heads bowed, struggling to figure out what to do. If you choose to leave the Morris family and follow me, then you can become the guardians of one of the Radiance's branches. Why are you so unwilling to leave them? What's holding you back? Kevin asked. Since the Morris family can't guarantee your future and obviously sees you as expendable, why don't you think about yourselves for a change? Kevin wasn't in a hurry to convince them. He could tell that he'd reached them on some level, but he knew that this was similar to what had happened with both the Hill siblings and the Dixon brothers. Kevin just had to be patient in order to show them that he sincerely wanted to recruit them. At the same time, Kevin had to be ready. With the Pinnacle already close to arriving on the continent, he didn't have much time left to prepare. And if he wasn't able to recruit more powerful warriors, he wouldn't have enough combat strength to fight them, and the Radiants would be unable to gain a foothold in Chicago and Detroit once the war broke out. And while the Radiants already had a presence in St. Louis, it could only serve as their last stronghold in case they had to pull back their forces from the other two cities.
If we choose to follow you, what other benefits can you give us?
Elijah Tanner asked him. Sage Tanner and the others were all stunned to hear this. They gave their big brother a puzzled look. If you're willing to be under my command, I can immediately let you break through as a level 5 expert, and the rest of you should also get there within a short period of time, Kevin guaranteed them in a calm and composed voice. Kevin patiently continued to try to convince Elijah Tanner and his brothers to leave the Morris family and follow him instead as guardians of one of the Radiance's branches. He needed to recruit more powerful warriors to increase the Radiance's combat strength in time to fight against the Pinnacle. Still conflicted by their decision, Elijah Tanner then asked Kevin what else he had to offer. Kevin then guaranteed him that he would immediately help him to break through as a level 5 expert, while the rest of his brothers would also get there very soon. Tyson Tanner looked at him with disdain and asked,
Is that a joke? Do you know what you're talking about?
Breaking through from one level to another can't be accomplished overnight. Do you know how much time and effort we spent just to get where we are now? It wasn't easy for us to reach our current power base. But for all our hard work, the Morris family rewarded us handsomely, Sage Tanner commented. Could you at least be more realistic when you're bragging about what you can do?
You don't believe me, do you? Kevin smiled faintly. Felix Tanner scoffed at him.
Of course not.
But before Felix could finish what he was saying, Kevin suddenly took out a large number of herbal pills from his pocket. When they saw this, Elijah and the others were stunned, unable to move. They just stared at the pills in Kevin's hands and gulped in amazement. They'd been working for the Morris family for so many years, so they naturally had a keen eye for herbal meds. So they could instantly tell that the pills in Kevin's hands were sparkling and translucent. They were definitely high-grade pills.
Why are you showing us those meds, Mr. Williams?
Elijah had finally managed to get up the nerve to speak. Faced with a situation like this, it would be pure nonsense to say that he wasn't feeling greedy. Given how much Kevin had so openly shown them the herbal meds, he naturally felt tempted to just snatch them all out of his hand. But at the same time, Elijah was aware that none of them was a match for Kevin, and if they attacked him, it was very likely that they would lose their lives in an instant. However, because he really wanted to get his hands on those coveted pills, he automatically changed the way he addressed Kevin. Don't you see? I'm trying to prove a point. The smile on Kevin's face gradually became wider and wider. As long as the 5 of you are willing to switch sides and pledge your loyalty to me, it won't just be these pills in my hands that'll end up in yours. In the future, there will be a lot more good things in store for you than the Morris family can ever offer. Hearing this, Elijah and the others' bodies began to tremble with excitement, and their hearts were pounding from the thought of achieving exponential gains in their strength with Kevin's help. So, have you thought about it? Do you wish to continue to be blindly loyal to the Morris family? Or will you abandon the darkness and join forces with the Radiants? Kevin calmly asked them. He was certain that the 5 of them would be tempted by the herbal meds he was showing them. After a few moments of silence, Sage slowly closed his eyes and sighed.
What kind of training ground can you provide us with? Also, if you're alone and there are no other powers behind you, how can you protect us? Mr. Williams, since you're also a businessman, don't we also have bargaining chips to negotiate with you? After all, it seems like you're in need of our services as well.
Even while saying this, Tyson's eyes told a totally different story. He couldn't take his eyes off the pills in Kevin's hands.
On that note, how can you show us that you're being sincere with us, Mr. Williams? With just your power base and pills alone, it'll be hard for us to accept you wholeheartedly as our leader. We need more assurance than that.
Felix tried his best to negotiate, but he was obviously heavily tempted by the pills alone as well. Kevin didn't dwell too much on their conditions, but at the same time he was certain that there was some validity to what they'd said. The Morris family was definitely a powerful force, so if Kevin didn't have an organization with comparable strength and was just a commander without any legitimate support, who would be stupid enough to risk their lives just to play around with them? If the Radiance is willing to be your umbrella, wouldn't that be enough? Kevin asked with a smile. When he said that, Elijah and the others were stunned for a moment. Then they slowly began to frown. Looking at their expressions, Kevin didn't have much confidence that he'd be able to convince them. The problem was that the Radiance was really the only other thing Kevin could entice them with, and they hadn't been interested in it when he offered it earlier. As expected, I still don't have enough power, Kevin thought to himself as he shook his head and sighed. After thinking for a few minutes, Elijah's frown slowly relaxed and he asked,
Mr. Williams, I have a question and I hope you can answer me honestly.
I'm sure it wouldn't factor into your decision, but go ahead, Kevin replied as he put the pills back in his pocket. His actions caused Sage and the others to change their expressions. Elijah also couldn't help but have a strange look in his eyes. Elijah hesitated for a moment and asked,
You already mentioned the Radiance earlier, but may I ask what exactly is the nature of your relationship with them? And if the Radiance will serve as our umbrella of protection, do we have to listen to the orders of the Radiance or will we answer directly to you?
He already had some level of understanding of the Radiance. As a new organization, the Radiance could definitely be considered a dark horse among the great powers. Their effective offer of handing power pills to new recruits made a lot of the other schools and organizations jealous. If it wasn't for the fact that the prestige of the Herbalist Society was too great in their hearts of other trained warriors, who knew how many of them who were either close to breaking through or already level 5 experts would join the Radiance? Because of this, even Elijah was also tempted by the Radiance. However, he still felt that the Radiance's current level of strength hadn't fully grown enough to match the scale of the top schools. After thinking about what to tell them for a few minutes, a mysterious smile suddenly emerged on Kevin's face. Obedience to the Radiance is equivalent to proving your loyalty to me, so don't worry. As long as you're under my command, I'll make sure that all of you will become among the most distinguished and powerful members of the Radiance. Meanwhile, on the roof of the Central Alternative Healing Academy's branch in Chicago, Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford were sitting in their chairs, leisurely drinking some coffee with sad expressions on their faces. The Alliance's attack had caused severe losses to the Central Alternative Healing Academy's forces, and with heavy damage to its headquarters as well, The school was currently in the midst of rebuilding itself from the ground up. That was why Paul Vaughn had brought his remaining people there to Chicago.
Paul, what are your thoughts about Wayne Ford's suggestion?
Jeffrey Bowie asked as he took a sip of coffee. Paul Vaughn raised his eyebrows slightly and looked casually at Wayne Ford. After that, he slowly sighed.
What else do you want me to say? The Central Alternative Healing Academy has already suffered a great loss in this war. We'll need to protect the Healing Arts School in the future.
He sounded completely exhausted. Jeffrey Bowie and Wayne Ford exchanged glances and saw some surprise in each other's eyes. This was Paul Vaughn, after all, and both he and Wayne didn't exactly see eye to eye all the time. However, they also knew that Paul Vaughn wasn't lying. The Central Alternative Healing Academy didn't just lose a significant chunk of its resources, but the backbone of its younger generation as well. If the Central Alternative Healing Academy wanted to prosper again in the future, it would be absolutely impossible without the younger generation. So protecting the students of the Healing Arts School became the most important priority for them. At the end of the day, they represented the future hope of any school.
But Paul, haven't you ever considered training your own crop of elite students?
Jeffrey asked again.
Jeffrey, are you kidding me? You and I both know that the most important aspect of nurturing the next generation is ensuring that they have a good education. Which school in the great powers would dare to say has better teaching skills than the Healing Arts School? Furthermore, the pills that were stored in the Central Alternative Healing Academy were also very powerful, and my hands are already tied as it is with managing that problem alone.
Paul seemed to be extremely wary of the entire situation. The Central Alternative Healing Academy was the fruit of his life's hard work, so it would be strange if he were in a good mood after witnessing it being ruined by the Alliance.
Why are you so troubled, Paul? Instead of waiting for the younger generation to take over someday, we should look for another way to find and bolster reinforcements today,
Wayne said cautiously.
Resisting the Pinnacle is our top priority right now. The Central Alternative Healing Academy strength must definitely be restored as soon as possible.
What do you mean, Wayne? Paul asked with a frown. How are we going to do that?
Doesn't Kevin have access to the Power Pills formula?
Wayne reminded him bluntly. Jeffrey Bowie and Paul Vaughn couldn't help feeling frustrated when they heard this. Of course they knew that Kevin had the Power Pills formula and they'd always wanted to get it from him. Wayne smiled charmingly and asked his colleagues,
Given that there are so many schools in the Great Powers, the existing supply of ready-made power pills definitely won't be enough. If we can get access to the Power Pills formula first, won't we be able to use it to control all the other schools?
That's a great idea.
Jeffrey suddenly slammed his palm on the table and his expression gradually became excited.
How are we going to go about this, Wayne?
Paul asked thoughtfully. No one wanted the Power Pills formula more than he did, and only this approach could allow the Central Alternative Healing Academy to recover its strength within a short period of time.
I know a way to draw Kevin out alone to meet the three of us. When the time comes, we'll force him to hand over the Power Pills formula,
Wayne said boldly. Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford had gathered together at the Central Alternative Healing Academy's branch in Chicago. Still reeling from the Alliance's attack, Paul conceded that they had to protect the Healing Arts School's students in order to rebuild for the future. However, Wayne told him to focus instead on recovering his school's strength as soon as possible to resist the Pinnacle. After suggesting that they should be the first to obtain the Power Pills formula in order to gain control over all the other schools, Wayne thought of a way that would force Kevin into handing it over to the three of them. Jeffrey Bowie and Paul Vaughn gently nodded their heads in agreement. At this point, they were willing to do anything in order to get their hands on the Power Pills formula. After all, this was the only way to ensure the prosperity of their respective schools, while getting the others to join forces in the upcoming war against the Pinnacle. As for the potential loss of Kevin, they believed that it was a small price to pay for the greater good. Meanwhile, Kevin was unaware of their discussion as he sat on a rock in the forest and looked at Yale Tanner, who was now in the middle of a heated discussion with his brothers. "Elijah, have you really made up your mind?" After recovering from his injuries, Yale Tanner didn't express any objections. He was only asking cautiously to make sure that all 5 of them had come to an agreement.
"This may finally be the turning point for us. I support Elijah's decision,"
Tyson remarked resolutely.
"The Morris family has never treated us like human beings. Even their pet dog has more than us. And look at the strength of their immediate family members. How about we compare our achievements with theirs?"
The more Sage Tanner spoke, the more convinced he became of his resentment towards the Morris family.
"What Mr. Williams said is true. Jake Morris has never rewarded us enough for all of our contributions. In fact, he usually took the credit and reaped most of the benefits. Plus, we've even had to endure his temper tantrums from time to time, getting punished for no good reason. Actually, deep down, I've wanted to teach him a lesson for a long time. It's just that I'm too embarrassed to hit him out of respect for my brothers."
Felix's eyes were filled with hostility as he spoke.
"Since none of us have any objections, I can agree to your conditions on behalf of all 5 of us, Mr. Williams,"
Elijah announced as he nodded his head. He didn't want to waste this golden opportunity. After all, there weren't many instances in one's life that could change one's fate like this. "Are you sure that you've discussed it enough with all your brothers?" Kevin asked anxiously.
"Our decision is final, Mr. Williams. We're wholeheartedly pledging our allegiance to you, boss."
Elijah was the first to kneel down in front of Kevin. The other 4 men bowed their heads slightly and followed Elijah's lead as they all knelt down beside him. Since they'd made their decision after some careful consideration, there wasn't anything for them to regret. "Everyone, I can assure you that your decision to follow me today will be the turning point of your lives." Kevin raised his hand happily and released his spiritual energy around the 5 Tanner brothers as he called them to stand up. Then he took 5 pills from his pocket and handed them one by one to each of the Tanner brothers. They noticed that the pills were giving off a strong medicinal fragrance.
"Boss, is this the legendary Energy Ascension pill?"
The 5 of them couldn't help but open their eyes wide as they looked at the medicinal pill in front of them. While they'd never seen one in person, they were very aware of the medicinal properties of the Energy Ascension pill. It could increase the quality of the spiritual energy in an expert's body. Its greatest function was to double the probability of someone on the cusp of becoming a level 5 expert finally breaking through to the next level. It was definitely something that could only be made by a grandmaster of herbalism and couldn't easily be bought by just anyone.
"Thank you, boss."
The 5 of them expressed their gratitude in unison. If they had doubted Kevin's words before, now they were completely convinced. Using the herbal ingredients from the Swinton family's pill room back in St. Louis, Kevin had refined the Energy Ascension pills at the same time he was concocting the System Cleansing pill for Catherine Swinton. He'd initially thought about giving them to Dylan Hill and his siblings, but now that he'd given them to Elijah Tanner and his brothers, it wouldn't be wasted. The 5 of them would be able to become level 5 experts in no time. In doing so would contribute to increasing the combat strength of the Radiants as a whole. Besides, since Kevin knew how to concoct pills, he could always just refine more in the future if Dylan Hill and the others needed them. Soon after, Kevin took the 5 brothers over to his penthouse apartment in Corwin Tower. "This is the place that I usually use for my training. You guys can stay here for now. I'll take you guys to the Radiance's headquarters once I finish sorting some things out." Kevin casually sat on the sofa and pointed at everything in the apartment. "The study on the 2nd floor is where I store some precious herbs. You guys need to pay special attention to it. Apart from that, you can use the other rooms as you wish."
"Understood, boss."
The Tanner brothers nodded their heads in unison as they looked around the apartment in awe. They could train here at any time. Although they got a glimpse of the upper-class lifestyle when they were with the Morris family, their training resources weren't as good as Kevin's. Moreover, being guests at Kevin's penthouse apartment, for once they could actually experience the good food and luxurious accommodations that their former bosses enjoyed all the time. One more thing. You guys don't have to call me boss anymore. It sounds awkward. You just need to call me Mr. Williams, Kevin said with a smile.
Understood, Mr. Williams.
They all looked very happy about this. The Tanner brothers felt relieved that there wasn't really much of a difference in status between them and Kevin. Unlike Jake Morris and his family, he didn't look down on them just because the 5 of them were his subordinates. Anyway, it's almost time for me to leave. You guys can go familiarize yourselves with all of the rooms and amenities in the apartment. I still have to go back home and cook for my wife. Kevin stood up and was about to walk out. When the 5 of them heard this, they immediately burst into laughter. Being able to follow such a relatable leader, Elijah and his brothers didn't feel like they were at a disadvantage at all compared to their previous situation. When Kevin returned to the Salix Leaf Complex, he wondered why Lily and Dorothy weren't home. Just as he entered the living room, he saw a piece of paper on the table.
If you want them to live, bring the Power Pills formula to the forest at 11 o'clock tonight,
the note read. Looking at the scrawled handwriting, Kevin suddenly became dead silent as he clenched his fists. However, after taking a few deep breaths, he managed to calm down enough to control his anger. At the moment, Kevin couldn't guess who had taken Lily and Dorothy. There were too many people who wanted the Power Pills formula. Time passed slowly. At 11 o'clock in the evening, Kevin arrived at the forest right on time. Because it was almost winter, the temperature in the forest had dropped a lot. In fact, if an ordinary person went there wearing casual clothes, they'd be freezing. Kevin put his hands in his pockets and walked into the forest. It's 11 o'clock already. Why haven't you shown yourself yet?
I didn't expect you to be on time.
A voice suddenly echoed from the depths of the forest. After a few seconds, 3 tall figures surrounded Kevin. I didn't expect it to be you guys. Kevin's eyes swept across the 3 of them. They were Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford. Inside a private room at the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook was leaning on the sofa listening intently to his son Drake's thoughts.
Dad, I've decided to follow Mr. Williams. He told me he would help me become stronger and give me a chance to soar.
With the help of Kevin's rapid recovery pill, Drake's body had already recovered by 80 to 99%. After a few moments of silence, Mitchell Cook let out a long sigh and nodded.
Good men should be ambitious, and Kevin's plans go far beyond the city limits of Chicago. But for now, what you need to do next is to trample Dominic Archer under your feet. Only then will you prove that you're qualified to work for Kevin.
Mitchell continued.
If there's anything you want to accomplish, you must do it boldly. That way, if you succeed, it will surely increase your horizons by another level. And if you fall short, you can rest assured that Kevin and I will find a way to save your life.
Drake shivered when he heard this, but he nodded his head firmly in agreement. At the same time, in the Archer family's mansion, Dominic Archer had gathered together more than 10 of his trusted aides right after learning that Drake Cook had been discharged from the hospital. Boss, do you think Drake Cook was just teasing us this whole time? How was he discharged so quickly after suffering such a serious injury? One of his aides was in disbelief. There's no scientific explanation for this. Now that he's been discharged from the hospital, it'll definitely have a serious impact on our future actions. Another one shook his head. Boss, there's no time to lose. When are we going to attack what's left of the Steele family? A third one urgently asked. Hearing his trusted aides, Dominic Archer's expression became sadder and sadder. While the Steele family had lost its momentum, he wasn't in a hurry to devour its remaining properties just yet. This was because Dominic wanted to meet with Kevin first. Everyone knew that Dalton Steele and Kevin were like brothers. But ever since the Steele family had suffered a great disaster, Dalton had yet to reappear in Chicago. At the same time, Kevin had yet to talk about the incident. so Dominic Archer was unable to figure out what was going on. Were Dalton Steele and Kevin still on brotherly terms? And was either of them working behind the scenes to reestablish the Steele family strength? I asked you to make arrangements for a dinner with the Williams Company CEO. How's it going? Dominic suddenly asked. Because Dominic and Gwen Archer were hoping to gain Kevin's support, he first wanted to know Kevin's thoughts on the matter before he would dare to act against the Steele family, or even Drake Cook, who'd just been discharged from the hospital. Boss, I don't understand. Why are you being so polite to the president of the Williams Company? One of his trusted aides was puzzled. As far as I know, we don't have any business dealings with them, do we? Boss, don't tell me that Drake Cook is the new president of the Williams Company. Another wondered, confusing all of the other aides even more. What are you talking about? I'm just asking if any of you've managed to contact him. Dominic sounded very displeased with them. One of his aides scratched his head as he reported. We've already tried to contact him, boss. It's just that we were only able to reach Miss Wilson as chief of staff. She simply said that she would do her best to pass on the message to him. But without any confirmation from her, it's hard to say whether he'll come tomorrow night or not. Go and find my sister right away. Dominic sighed in frustration. It was obvious that Miss Wilson wasn't enough to reach Kevin. Fortunately, he remembered that Gwen had Kevin's phone number. Meanwhile, in the study of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Richard Swinton put down the report in his hand and rubbed his temples tiredly. Hubby, it's already so late. Don't you plan to rest? Catherine Swinton placed a glass of water on the table. Richard had been busy for the past several days, staying up late at night until he fell asleep. He would then wake up early in the morning and continue to work. Seeing him like this, Catherine Swinton felt bad for him. She was afraid that his body would eventually give up on him if he kept this up much longer. However, she didn't know how to help him either.
I'm just dealing with something important. Why aren't you asleep yet?
Richard looked at his wife dotingly. I was too worried about you. Catherine hesitated for a while before she continued. It's been many years since I've seen you work so hard. You need to look out for your health.
I know. It's just that I have to pave the road as smoothly as possible for Kevin's return while I'm still healthy enough. I don't know why he suddenly went back to Chicago and left such a big mess in St. Louis, Richard said with a sigh. If it wasn't for the Pinnacle trying to invade the continent and posing a huge threat to everyone, the Huxley family would have already used this opportunity to rekindle itself.
You really think so highly of Kevin, Catherine complained resentfully. I've never seen you care so much about Gail or Brenda. Richard sighed again.
Catherine, I'm doing all of this not just for Kevin, but for the sake of our entire family. After all, we don't know when the Pinnacle will try to break through again. If they succeed, they'll definitely cause mayhem, so we have to be prepared. Besides, think about it. We only have 2 daughters. If both of them get married someday, who will we hand over the future of the Swinton family to? Kevin isn't just the son of Alan Williams, but he's also our adopted son. So he has every right to inherit what I've built. With his potential, he'll surely do great things someday. And when that happens, the Swinton family's reputation will naturally rise along with him. And even if our daughters don't marry, Gail and Brenda will need Kevin to take care of them. Richard patiently explained. Although Catherine Swinton understood the reasoning behind it, it still bothered her. Gail and Kevin seem to have a very cold and unfriendly relationship. And although Kevin is a young man with infinite potential, he's already married. So obviously he cannot become Brenda's husband, Catherine said sadly. If anything happens to the 2 of us, how can we be certain that Kevin will protect our daughters from harm? You don't have to worry about that.
At the end of the day, I believe that he wouldn't dare to mistreat either of our daughters. But I'll make sure to talk to Kevin about taking care of his sisters when the time comes."
Richard patted the back of his wife's hand to comfort her. Back in Chicago, Kevin was alone in the forest facing Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford. The powerful aura that emitted from the four of them collided intensely in an almost invisible way, as waves of energy rippled through their surroundings. This was so strong that even the temperature in the forest was affected, causing it to become piercingly cold as if winter had already arrived. The three of you are distinguished and respected experts who have been famous in the great powers for many years. I never thought that you would do such a dirty thing, Kevin remarked grimly.
"This is a very critical time, and you've left us with no choice but to resort to these methods in order to protect the future of our respective schools."
Paul Vaughn narrowed his eyes as he stared at Kevin.
"Paul is right. Actually, we never intended for things to turn out like this. We'd already asked you politely about it before, but you chose to ignore and disrespect us instead."
Jeffrey Bowie clenched his fist so hard that you could hear his knuckles cracking.
"If you don't cooperate with us, then you better brace yourself for a lot of pain."
In the face of their threatening words, Kevin's face didn't change at all. There was only a hint of disdain in his eyes. "What gives you the right to threaten me like that?" Kevin asked indignantly. Similarly, Paul Vaughn and the other two didn't have any change in expression either. Kevin's reaction wasn't surprising to them. After all, the outcome of their confrontation had already been decided. At the moment, they clearly felt that they had the upper hand with Lily and Dorothy being held captive. And if Kevin still didn't cooperate with them, the forest would definitely be stained with his blood since he was surely outmatched and outnumbered.
"Actually, this matter hasn't reached an irreparable stage just yet. As long as you're willing to hand over the Power Pills formula, we can forget that any of this ever happened. Moreover, the three of us will even gratefully become your allies in the future."
Wayne Ford tried to offer an olive branch to Kevin with a smile.
"Why don't we just bury the hatchet, Kevin? We're all from the great powers, and we don't need to fight each other over this. All we want is the formula to protect the future of our schools."
Wayne Ford added,
"You're still young and filled with potential, Kevin. What you want is to live the rest of your life without worries, so I hope you make the right decision."
Paul Vaughn raised an eyebrow as he glanced at Wayne Ford. Although he said these words very calmly, he couldn't hide the violent intent in his eyes. "What is there to think about? Mr. Ford, you're already an old man. I don't think there's a need for you to speak so arrogantly. After all, you should be setting a good example to an impressionable young man like me," Kevin replied with a sneer. "Besides, even after giving you the pill formula, how can I be so sure that I'll still be alive after tonight?" Kevin wasn't a fool. He wouldn't believe such lies from any of these three old men. Did they think he was a 3-year-old child that they could easily coax?
"Kevin, since you're being so stubborn, then you can't blame us for what we're about to do,"
Wayne Ford said with a hint of pity in his voice.
"Be careful what you wish for."
Paul Vaughn quickly drew his sword from behind his back and it gave off a cold light in the dark forest. "Why do you keep rambling on about such nonsense? If you want to challenge us, then stop yapping and start fighting right now." Jeffrey Bowie pounded his chest with both of his fists and let out a roar towards the evening sky. His body was emitting a fiery aura as the spiritual energy coming from within was obviously much stronger than it had been the last time he fought Kevin back in Detroit. "I see that now he's just a few notches away from becoming a level 6 expert," Kevin thought to himself. It seems that he's gained a lot of motivation to improve his power base after the outcome of our previous battle. Just as the thought flashed through Kevin's mind, Paul Vaughn was already making the first move. He pushed off like an Olympic sprinter and rushed towards Kevin at an extremely fast speed, seemingly going from one point to the next in the blink of an eye. Although Kevin was able to react in time, the tip of Paul Vaughn's sword whizzed past, tearing his shirt. "Mr. Vaughn, your power base is really good. A sword attack like that isn't something an ordinary person's reflexes can avoid, and the impact of your strike isn't easy to withstand either." Kevin steadied his body as he praised him. "You should be more concerned about yourself first." Jeffrey Bowie bellowed arrogantly as he jumped high up into the air and landed with fists of fury as he aimed directly at Kevin's head. A second later, a loud bang could be heard as waves of energy rippled across the entire forest, filling the evening sky with clouds of dust. Before heading to the forest with Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie, Wayne Ford was standing on the roof of the tallest building of the Healing Arts School along with Harley Shepard. From there, they could see half of Chicago laid out before them.
"Greed is a force that can't be underestimated,"
Wayne Ford remarked as he stood with his hands behind his back, gazing out at the dark horizon. "Perhaps what you're saying is true. The current state of the great powers is like a pool of dead water. Many schools have broken the rules that everyone originally established and agreed upon. We need someone who can stand up and break away from this situation." After saying that, Harley Shepard suddenly sighed and added, "It's just that the timing isn't right. With the Pinnacle about to attack the continent, we can't afford to waste our strength on fighting with each other right now."
"Are you feeling sorry for the schools, or are you speaking up for Kevin?"
Wayne Ford asked somberly as he turned his gaze from the horizon and looked Harley Shepard in the eyes. Harley Shepard frowned slightly when he heard him. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. The roof suddenly fell silent. As the night wind blew on their clothes, it filled the void with rustling sounds. After a few moments, Harley slowly answered Wayne's question. "Is there any difference between the two?"
"Allow me to rephrase my question then. Which is more important, for the schools to be prepared against the Pinnacle or for Kevin to come to our aid?"
Wayne's expression didn't change much while he said this. "Although Kevin is a rare talent that can eventually be molded, he hasn't developed to his full potential yet, so he might not be much more useful than the major schools when it comes to resisting the Pinnacle." Harley Shepard conceded as he looked at Wayne with a serious look on his face. Wayne Ford was an old friend that he'd known for many years. However, he didn't understand why Wayne thought so highly of Kevin, but at the same time, had no problem scheming with the other leaders to obtain the Power Pill's formula at all costs. In Harley Shepard's eyes, the reason why they both valued Kevin was because his talent stood out quite prominently among the younger generation. If he continued to train well, he would definitely become a great master someday. But more importantly, the mentor behind Kevin had also left a deep impression on both Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard. And having a powerful person like that on their side would greatly benefit them for the rest of their lives. In light of all of this, why was Wayne Ford willing to throw everything away?
"Harley, with the looming threat of the Pinnacle, every second counts. And in the end, we still have to keep our eyes on the greater good."
Wayne Ford patted his shoulder and sighed.
"I'm sure Kevin will eventually understand why I have to do this."
The battle in the forest was getting more and more intense as it was headed towards its final moments. The four of them kept moving throughout different sections of the forest. Their swords were overflowing with powerful auras, and the strong spiritual energy waves generated from all of their strikes had already caused severe damage to their surroundings. At the moment, Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford were getting more and more concerned as it seemed that Kevin had concealed his abilities too deeply. From the beginning of their battle until now, he had yet to reveal any flaws. For someone who could be killed at any possible moment, he was fighting all three of them in a very calm and composed manner. "Looks like we underestimated this kid. But regardless of the situation, we must get the pill formula from Kevin tonight no matter what." Paul Vaughn stomped on the ground forcefully. The spiritual energy in his body suddenly circulated around him intensely as he began to project a terrifying aura.
Is that the secret technique of the Central Alternative Healing Academy?
Wayne Ford exclaimed in surprise. Paul is about to unleash his full strength on Kevin. We can't fall behind and let him down. Jeffrey Bowie took a deep breath as his body instantly tensed up, and he drew on all of his spiritual energy as well. When Kevin noticed the changes in the two of them, he was very concerned. As expected, he too had underestimated the strength of his opponents. While he knew that anyone who was able to establish themselves in both the great powers and the top schools was certainly no slouch, the true extent of their power couldn't be evaluated during ordinary interactions. Suddenly, Jeffrey Bowie and Paul Vaughn opened their eyes at the same time as they looked at Kevin with violent intent. In just a few seconds, they were both emitting a vast amount of energy. What is this secret technique? It looks so powerful. Kevin's eyes suddenly grew wide in amazement.
Kevin, this is the secret technique of the Central Alternative Healing Academy. Because it requires so much strength, it can only be used once a month, Paul Vaughn explained. At the end of the day, you're just a young student who doesn't know any better. So I'm giving you one last chance. It's not too late for you to surrender now, Kevin. After all, we don't really have any desire to hurt you. That is, unless you force us to.
The battle in the forest was about to reach its peak. When the three leaders realized that they had underestimated Kevin's abilities, Paul Vaughn no longer held back and decided to unleash his full strength on him. With Jeffrey Bowie following suit, Kevin began to understand the true strength of these leaders as well. Paul Vaughn gave Kevin one last chance to surrender as he found himself faced with the Central Alternative Healing Academy's secret technique. Otherwise, Kevin would face dire consequences. Is all of this really necessary just for a power pill? Kevin narrowed his eyes slightly and wondered why they were all fighting. He had some experience with experts using special skills against him, such as when he battled against one of Paul Vaughn's top students, Clarissa Pratt. She used the halo technique on him during the martial arts competition. So Kevin knew that the stronger the technique, the more serious the injuries it would cause, either to someone's body or power base. Some techniques could even result in permanent damage. Still, Kevin was curious to find out what the Central Alternative Healing Academy's secret technique would be like.
Kevin, we're asking you for the last time. Are you going to peacefully hand over the formula to us or not?
Jeffrey Bowie's voice became unusually loud as his words echoed throughout the surrounding space. And what will happen if I still refuse to give it to you? Kevin asked with a smile on his face.
Then I'll have to kill you right now and take it away from you by force,
Paul Vaughn responded indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, Paul Vaughn gently waved the sword in his hand and quickly rushed to the side. This caused the ground under Kevin's feet to shake as if there was an earthquake. At the same time, Vaughn's sword slashed several times in different directions as he circled around Kevin. It seemed that he could do whatever he wanted. Luckily, Kevin was able to react just quickly enough to avoid all of Vaughn's sword strikes. But after he stabilized his position, he heard the sound of a sword whizzing through the air. This made the hairs on the back of Kevin's neck suddenly stand up. How can he move faster than the speed of sound? Kevin was dumbfounded. He never thought that an old man like Paul Vaughn had such strength and agility.
You may have dodged my first couple of strikes, but can you still do the same with the next ones?
Paul Vaughn sneered as his whole body was enveloped in his spiritual energy.
I don't believe that you can last that long.
Then Paul Vaughn launched another swift attack and shredded Kevin's shirt and jacket. This was followed by a series of slashing sounds. Fortunately, Kevin was still wearing his body armor, which protected him from any harm.
Paul, don't be so selfish. Let me take a few shots myself.
Jeffrey Bowie smirked as he pushed off the ground and shot forward like a cannonball. He threw a powerful punch at Kevin's head, and as it approached closer and closer to his target, a series of tiny ripples could be seen around it. When Kevin saw the punch coming, it was obvious to him how terrifyingly powerful it was. However, since he also had to be on guard against Paul Vaughn's sword strikes, Kevin didn't dare to act rashly. He only had time to duck down and punch back fearlessly. As their fists collided, the sound of a muffled explosion of energy could be heard throughout the forest. When the dust settled, the three leaders could see that while Kevin had maintained his posture after throwing the punch, the impact had made him slide back more than 30 feet. His legs had sunk deep into the ground, and he even knocked over several thick trees that were in his path. So strong, Kevin thought to himself in surprise. Jeffrey Bowie's strength had certainly increased since their previous encounter back in Detroit. He'd never really regarded any of the major school's leaders that highly. Only now did he realize that what he previously saw on the surface didn't necessarily paint the whole picture.
Kevin, hand over the Power Pills formula,
Paul Vaughn demanded as he tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot. A second later, he disappeared from where he was standing. Kevin took a deep breath, turned around, and threw another punch with all his momentum to hit Paul Vaughn's sword. Again, his body armor protected his skin, and the sword generated intense sparks when it struck him.
I didn't expect him to have such a powerful treasure on him,
Wayne Ford remarked. Just then, a greedy look flashed over Wayne Ford's eyes as he kept running circles around everyone while subtly throwing some powder onto the three of them. Because of his movements, the space where the four of them were fighting suddenly became strange, and the ground under them started to sway uncontrollably. It was as if they were on a small boat that was being subjected to the harsh and unpredictable waves of a stormy sea. Kevin, who was about to get up, was suddenly stunned as he struggled to balance himself. How could this be? Kevin widened his eyes and quickly looked around. There was no change in the environment, but he felt like he was floating in the air, and he couldn't use any of his strength at all. A second later, Kevin felt as if he'd been transported into a muddy swamp, and his feet kept sinking into the ground no matter where he stepped.
Damn, Wayne Ford. Why didn't you tell us in advance that you'd be playing this trick?
Jeffrey Bowie couldn't help but swear at him.
Looks like Kevin can't move at all. Let's see what he can do to get out of this situation.
Paul Vaughn slowly closed his eyes as he drew his spiritual energy into his sword.
Kevin, you've greatly offended all of us with your blatant arrogance and disrespect. For that, you shall pay a heavy price. But don't worry, we'll take care of your family for you once you've been dealt with,
Wayne Ford said quietly. To Kevin, Wayne Ford's voice seemed to have descended from the sky, and the sound penetrated through Kevin's skull as if the old man was yelling at the top of his lungs right into his ears. Stop it! Kevin hugged his head and cried out in pain. His face began to distort in agony. Suddenly, Jeffrey Bowie appeared behind Kevin's back and hit him with a vicious punch. Not seeing where it came from, the result was obvious as Kevin was sent flying through the air. He then crashed into several trees before falling to the ground. And as he tried to gasp for air, he spurted out a mouthful of blood.
Jeffrey, what the hell are you doing? You should have let him be stuck in the mirage that I created. When he won't be able to hold on any longer, he'll beg for mercy and obediently hand over the Power Pills formula.
A raging flame of fury instantly rose in Wayne Ford's heart.
By punching him out of his trance, you've practically ruined our chances.
Don't think that I don't know what you're planning. When you threw that powder over all of us, you probably wanted to place Paul and me inside your mirage as well, right? Were you really just trying to attack Kevin? Or did you want to get rid of the two of us as well so that you can have the Power Pills formula all to yourself? Jeffrey Bowie snorted as he accused him.
Stop talking nonsense, Jeffrey. I was only doing my part to help you guys. If it wasn't for the two of you holding Kevin back and keeping him distracted, how could I have set up this mirage? Are you using your brain or not?
The more Wayne Ford spoke, the more furious he became. Paul Vaughn shot a nasty glance at Wayne Ford. A mirage caused a trance-like state filled with endless illusions that subverted reality. Anyone who was enveloped by this would experience a powerful attack on their senses because of it. Only those who were both powerful and quick enough could escape its effects. Paul Vaughn closed his eyes once again to adjust his state of mind. He wanted to ensure that he wouldn't be affected by Wayne Ford's strategy. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that all three leaders had shown their best hand just to obtain the Power Pills formula. But whether they were truly working together or just using each other was a weakness in their plan that Kevin felt he could exploit once he heard them arguing. The three of you claim to be righteous leaders of your schools, but at the end of the day, you're all just fishing for more fame and status. Your distinguished reputation in the great powers is quite undeserved, to be honest." Despite being injured so badly, Kevin endured all the pain and slowly stood up from the ground. His legs continued to tremble slightly, and a bit of blood still oozed out of his mouth and nose as he faced them.
"Kevin, how can you blame us? We told you that we didn't want to do this. It was you who refused to listen to my advice and stubbornly forced us to attack you."
Paul Vaughn turned around and looked at him as he tried to justify his actions. At the moment, he had to admit that no one in the younger generation could compare with Kevin, at least not in the Central Alternative Healing Academy. "You just want the pill formula, isn't that true? Just walk up to me and I'll gladly give it to you," Kevin said with a smile. Paul Vaughn was obviously stunned when he heard this. He naively thought that this meant that Kevin had finally admitted defeat, so he started walking towards Kevin.
"Hold on, Paul. You just can't go to him alone. I'm coming too."
Jeffrey Bowie couldn't help but remind Paul Vaughn as he immediately rushed over to walk beside him.
If Kevin was willing to cooperate after all, then why did he have to start a fight with us?
Wayne Ford thought to himself as his facial expression brightened up instantly. Then he started to walk towards Kevin as well. "Hold your horses. Just choose wisely amongst yourselves who will come forward. I will only give the pill formula to one person, and then he'll be the one to share it with the others. That is, if he wants to," Kevin slowly told them as he gasped for breath. Still feeling the effects of the mirage, he was so dizzy that his head felt like it was going to explode. Upon hearing this, the three old men stopped walking and their faces suddenly became serious.
"Kevin, are you doing this for your pure enjoyment? This is no laughing matter."
Wayne Ford narrowed his eyes slightly.
"Besides, this is such a clumsy way to do things. Do you think we're 3-year-old children? Just give us the pill formula all at once."
Based on his reaction, it would be nonsense to think that he wasn't interested in the pill formula. "Mr. Vaughn, are you still not coming? The Alliance's attack must have caused heavy losses to your school, didn't it? Once you have the Power Pills formula, it will allow you to rebuild within a short period of time. Beyond that, I'll also give you the augmentation pill formula. With both pills, I guarantee that the Central Alternative Healing Academy will surpass all the other schools in the future." Kevin ignored Wayne Ford as he tried his best to overcome the discomfort in his head. His lips were trembling as he spoke.
"Are there any conditions?"
Paul Vaughn asked uncertainly. Out of all of them, Paul Vaughn was the one who wanted to get the pill formula the most after losing almost his entire school to the Alliance's attack. It was because of this desperation that Kevin decided to talk to him instead of the other two. Kevin's test for the three leaders was the same as giving candy to children. If there were 3 children and only 1 piece of candy, then how would the other 2 who didn't get the candy react? At the moment, Paul Vaughn's spiritual energy had already eased up, but the excitement in his heart couldn't be contained much longer. However, he'd just taken 2 steps forward when he was stopped by Wayne Ford, who rushed up and stepped in front of him.
"Paul, don't be careless. Don't you see the poisonous trap that Kevin has set for us?"
Wayne Ford asked cautiously. Before Paul Vaughn could say anything, Kevin suddenly remarked loudly, "Mr. Ford, what's wrong? Are you afraid of something?"
"Paul, don't be fooled by his hypocrisy. After all, we've been friends for so many years. Don't you know what kind of person I am?"
Wayne Ford tried to reason with Paul Vaughn. "Mr. Vaughn, it seems to me that Mr. Ford is afraid that after you obtain the pill formula, the Central Alternative Healing Academy will surpass the Healing Arts School and threaten his reputation among the great powers. You must not be fooled by his words," Kevin warned. Wayne Ford's facial expression changed instantly when he heard this. He didn't expect that his innermost thoughts would be exposed so casually by Kevin. This briefly left him stunned. It was true that Paul Vaughn had known Wayne Ford for a long time, so he already knew about this and had seen through his antics. He immediately turned sideways and continued walking towards Kevin.
"Jeffrey, what are you still standing there for? Why aren't you stopping him? If Kevin succeeds in fooling Paul and lands a sneak attack on him, all our efforts to obtain the pill formula will be in vain," Wayne Ford shouted in desperation.
Mr. Ford, with all due respect, what you just said is a load of crap. Look at me now. Do you think I still have the strength to fight? Kevin said weakly. Right now, Kevin looked really miserable. His clothes were all torn and tattered, and blood was flowing out of his mouth and nose. Moreover, his breath was so weak that it seemed like he was about to faint.